Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at deformers. But first of all, I want to show you this awesome model I've been working on. Yeah, it's pretty intense. So, notice it has lots of divisions. When you're using deformers, what deformers do, they allow you to model instead of on a component level where you're picking and choosing vertices. It allows you to vertices to be influenced by things such as curves or boxes or cages. And I want to show you a couple of those. To use deformers, you need to go to the animation menu. Okay. Within the animation menu, you have animation deformers here. I'm going to break this off. Those are some of your most simple ones. And blend shapes, basically you need two shapes that have the exact same mesh, one copied to the other. And you deform one, and then you can create a morph between one and the deformed one. They're interesting, used in facial animation quite a bit. A lattice, on the other hand, is basically a cage that a square cage, like a cube, that's put around the bounds of your selected object, and then you can come and give it more divisions. And then when you start manipulating the points of this cage, the lattice points, those can begin influencing the geometry. Now, it's going to have a smoother influence depending on the density of your source mesh. Okay, so this is a lattice, basically a little cage that you can use in it, and it's moving all those vertices that you would have had to select by hand, and it influences those. Okay. Now there's also a large list of deformers if you go to the open full deformer menu here, and there's some that even going off the screen here. It also has the blend. I'll talk a little bit about clusters. And to get rid of a deformer that's applied to your geometry, you can go to Edit, Delete by Type History, and it kind of forgets that. Clusters are when you can select groups of vertices. Let's say these vertices here, I can make that into a cluster, and then that cluster can be moved. So basically it's a selection of vertices. Sometimes I'll just draw a box around the cluster and the geometry and shift select the geometry. So clusters are kind of cool. And so that cluster could be animated. So if you wanted this to be Stretchy Man, right, you could animate this cluster. I could keyframe that cluster, say at frame 1, and then go to frame 50, and then so that's an interesting way you could animate on a deformer level. So I'm going to undo that. I'm not going to get into most of these, but I do want to talk about nonlinear deformers just because they're cool, and demonstrate a few of these. So I'm going to make a couple of copies here. Command D. So first, I'm going to try the bend deformer, and the bend deformer puts a rod through the middle of your character by default, up and down. And to manipulate a deformer, you have to go into its inputs. So nothing happens right off, but if you go into this bend 1, nothing really happens if I change the envelope. But if I go and change this curvature, notice this curve is what's being manipulated, and that begins to manipulate my geometry. So I'll go back to the middle and edit and delete by type history. The next one is a flare. So we can try the flare, and you have two circles with that rod in the center, and basically we can change the size of the bottom or top to make one end and get larger like a flare. So you have the flare X, and you can flare Z, object's kind of flat, so we're not getting a lot of result here. But you can see kind of what you can do with the flare. I'm just going to delete that one. Sign's kind of a cool one. This one puts a rod kind of like the other one, but instead of just creating curves to the left and right, you can do a whole sine wave, and you can change the amplitude. So you could animate this guy dancing and do that all just by animating this amplitude here of your deformer. There's an interesting one you can do where if I lay this guy down and put a sine deformer through him and give him a little bit of amplitude, I can actually move this model separate from the deformer, and it only deforms when it's in the influence of this. So I could, as I slide, I could animate this guy to come in contact with the deformer, kind of like a snake. So imagine some kind of slithery animal. A lot of fun to play with the first bend deformer. And I show you this just when you're looking at the inputs, go ahead and play around with some of this. This has a high and a low bound, which can turn off. Like the curvature was influencing the top and the bottom. Well, we can get rid of this, the influence it has on the bottom. So, and just use the curvature to play with the top. Some people use deformers to animate things. Some people use them to model. Suppose I have a cube and it has a lot of subdivisions, and the height, and I could apply a twist deformer to this, and it does just what you think it would do. There's a start angle, and I can middle mouse drag, and you can apply multiple deformers. This guy has a sine deformer. I could put a twist deformer on him as well, and so he could. And the fact that this can be animated just makes it a fun, interesting tool. So for this week's assignment, if you're in the class, take a look at some of this and make a short, say 5-second animation. Experiment with deformers. So the exercise for this week is to animate a simple object using deformers. Make it interesting. Experiment with some of the different ones. 5 seconds. Do a quick play blast. Post your animation to YouTube and share it with the class.